Thank you guys so much for being here today. So before we begin, I'll just cover a few quick housekeeping notes. So for those of you who don't know me, we all do here, but hello and welcome. My name is Linding, and I'm a Masters of Counselling student. So today's session is not a part of my course. It is something that I've brought in to offer for those who can't go to therapy for whatever reason, who just need a safe space to feel connected, to feel secure, to feel understood, or who just need some guidance. So it will be recorded for educational purposes and put onto YouTube, so you can view it later if you want. Only I will be in the frame, and anything that you share of personal details will not be included in the final recording either. And we will be discussing mental health, so if at any point you do feel overwhelmed or you just don't feel well, you don't want to contribute, you don't want to be here anymore, that is fine. Just prioritize your own well-being, tune into what you need. You can take a breather, grab a drink, or just leave entirely. Just tune into what you need and honor that. So I wanted to preface today just with one thing, and that is, and I think it's important to address, because when there are actually many ways, approaches, tools, and methods that you can use and that can be utilized to manage overthinking better. And I'm sure that you've heard some of them before. And it's far too many to go over in just 1 hour. So I've chosen a single angle today because I believe it's something that's not often discussed. And I believe that's because it can feel a little confrontational when it's not done in the right way. So I want to start with this. So if you've had a decision in your life, maybe big, maybe small, maybe somewhere in between, and you were genuinely confused about that decision, you would likely try to ask someone that's maybe further along the path than you, that you see, maybe someone that you trust, that you can confide in, someone that you consider has knowledge, and then you would act, right? And that's typically what confusion looks like. It seeks a clear resolution, but that's likely not what's happening if you're thinking that you're overthinking, essentially. What's probably happening is that instead you're rehearsing it endlessly, replaying the same conversations maybe that happened in the past, analyzing scenarios that have never happened and may never actually happen. Thinking about thinking about thinking. And this tells us something important, that something else is happening. It's not simply confusion. It's something far more complex and costly. So we're going to examine what overthinking actually is, why it persists despite causing you so much distress, and what you can do about it. But I want to be clear from the start that I'm not here to tell you that overthinking is some sort of flaw, or I'm not here to shame you for being anxious, and I'm certainly not here to tell you to just relax and just let it go. What I'm here to tell you is that overthinking is not actually a thinking problem. It's an avoidance problem. And until you understand what it is that you're avoiding, you'll continue to mistake that mental rehearsal for preparation, for problem solving, and instead become paralyzed. And I wanted to address this early in the year because we all have these grand plans of how we want the year to turn out. But sometimes they go nowhere simply because we overthink them. And most people who overthink believe that they're being thorough, right? They believe that they're being responsible. They believe that if they think hard enough, for long enough, carefully enough, that they'll arrive at certainty and feel secure in themselves. But there's a truth in clinical research that has been demonstrated time and time again. Overthinking does not lead to better decisions or better decision making. It often just leads to decision avoidance. It does not reduce anxiety. It maintains it. It does not protect you from pain. Almost always you'll experience that for longer. So I hope today that you're going to be willing to examine what your mind is actually doing when it spirals and why it keeps doing it despite the cost. Then we're going to try to make some actual progress with it as well. Because the pattern that you're stuck in is not random. It's deeply functional and serves a purpose. And once you understand that purpose, you can choose a different strategy for it. But we need to establish a precise distinction right now before we continue, because without it, everything can maybe seem a bit more unclear. And that difference is not about the duration, it's not about the intensity when we consider the difference between thinking and rumination. The difference that we're after is about how it's oriented. And what do I mean by that? So productive thinking is oriented towards action and resolution. So it moves you somewhere. It generates options, evaluates them, and then arrives at a decision. Even if that decision is imperfect at the moment, even if it requires adjustment later, it closes the loop. The thinking ends in action. Rumination, on the other hand, is oriented towards avoidance and temporary relief. So it does not move you anywhere. It circles. It reviews the same information repeatedly without synthesis, without taking you anywhere. It generates anxiety briefly, reduces it through the mental rehearsal, but then it regenerates it again when that rehearsal ends. Because there's no resolution, there's no decision. When rumination does not end in action, it just makes you exhausted instead. And the clinical literature is unambiguous on this. So Susan Nolan-Herxheimer, one of the leading researchers on rumination, defines it as repetitive and passive focus on symptoms of distress and the possible causes and consequences of these symptoms. Notice the word passive. Rumination, it feels active, right? It feels like you're doing something mentally. But functionally, it's passive because it does not produce change. It does not lead you to an outcome. And let me show you the cognitive loop that maintains overthinking. So it starts with an ambiguous future. So something is uncertain. Maybe it's a relationship, a career decision, a health concern, a social interaction, and that uncertainty triggers threat prediction. So your mind goes into simulating negative outcomes. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I regret this? And that prediction, it feels like your responsibility, right? If you can foresee a problem occurring, you feel obliged to prevent it. So you engage in what looks like thinking, but actually it's avoidance that's disguised as problem solving. Because you research endlessly, you seek reassurance, you mentally rehearse and you analyze. But the critical part is that this only provides temporary relief. For a moment, you feel like you're managing this threat. You feel like you're being responsible. But because no decision was made, the ambiguity remains. And when that relief fades, the cycle begins again. Except now, maybe the situation has become more chaotic because time has passed. Your options maybe have narrowed at this point, and the stakes just feel higher. So I want to say this as clearly as possible that if your thinking does not end in a decision, it is not thinking, it is rumination. And rumination is not a sign that you're being thorough. It is a sign that you're avoiding something. The question we need to answer is, what are you avoiding? So to understand why overthinking persists, we need to understand what your brain is actually doing when it spirals. Your brain is trying to predict the future in order to protect you. Human brains are prediction machines. This is not metaphorical, this is how they function. And it's something that I've mentioned to you many times before. Our brain constantly generates models of what it thinks is going to happen next based on your past experiences, your current context of what's happening, and any perceived threats in your environment. So when the future is predictable, your brain just relaxes. It knows what's happening, it's good. When the future is uncertain, your brain fills that uncertainty gap with mental simulations. This is where overthinking starts. So research on the default mode network, the brain system that's active during self-referential thinking, shows that when you're not focused on an external task, it automatically drifts into mental simulations. So it starts running scenarios. What if this happens? What would I do? How would I feel? What would others think? It's very adaptive. So for most of human history, the ability to adapt and to anticipate threats and prepare responses increased your chances of survival. The problem is that modern life presents threats that your brain is not equipped to handle. Social rejection, career uncertainty, existential questions about meaning and about purpose. And these threats are ambiguous, prolonged, and unresolvable usually through any sort of physical action. So your brain does the only thing then that it knows how to do, and it just keeps simulating. And now's where it gets a little bit more complex, because there's two types of repetitive thinking that researchers distinguish, and it's worry and rumination. Thomas Borkovec, who developed the intolerance of uncertainty model, describes worry as repetitive thinking aimed at preventing negative outcomes. So it's future focused. What if I fail the exam? What if they don't like me? What if I make the wrong choice? Rumination, based on the work of Nolan Hoeksema, is repetitive thinking focused on past problems or emotional pain. So it's past focused. Why did I say that? Why do I always do this? What's wrong with me? Both serve the same function. They're attempts to solve emotional discomfort with logic. But there's the problem. Emotional discomfort is not a logic problem. It's a physical and a regulation problem. You can't think your way out of anxiety. You can't analyze your way out of uncertainty. But what you can do is temporarily reduce the intensity of the feeling by engaging in mental activity that feels productive. And that's why overthinking persists, because it works. Maybe not in the long term, but it sure does in the short term. It provides relief. Every time you mentally rehearse a difficult conversation, you feel slightly more prepared. Every time you rehearse another, or you research another option, you feel slightly more informed. And every time you analyze what went wrong, you feel slightly more in control. And your brain learns, this works. I feel a little bit less uncomfortable right now. Do it again. And the technical term for this is negative reinforcement. The behavior is reinforced not because it produces a reward for you, but because it removes discomfort. And negative reinforcement is one of the most powerful learning mechanisms that we have. So your brain keeps doing it. It keeps simulating, it keeps rehearsing, it keeps analyzing, because it believes that if it can think far enough ahead, it can prevent you from ever feeling caught off guard, blindsided, humiliated, or rejected. But there's a cost. The more you rely on mental simulation to manage uncertainty, the less you trust your ability to handle uncertainty in real time, in the moment, the only time when it really matters. The more you rehearse, the less confident you become in your ability to improvise in the moment. The more you analyze, the more you erode your trust in your own judgments. So overthinking doesn't protect you from emotional pain. It almost always just guarantees you'll experience it for longer, more intensely, and more frequently. Because you're not just living through the difficult situation, you're living through it dozens of times in your mind before it even happens. And here's the core insight that might change how you approach it from now on. Overthinking is a strategy of the mind, and it's a strategy that works. So let me explain what I mean by presenting Borkovec's avoidance theory of worry. Borkovec discovered something counterintuitive. Worry is primarily verbal and linguistic, not imaginal. So when you worry, you're not usually imagining vividly the feared outcome. You're thinking about it in words. You're narrating it. And this verbal style of processing suppresses your emotional and physiological activation. So in other words, worry prevents you from fully feeling the fear. So it keeps the emotion at a distance. It's cognitive, not visceral. And this is why worry persists, because it provides that short-term relief from the intensity of your emotions. When you worry, you feel like you're doing something about the problem without actually confronting it. You're engaging with the threat, but only abstractly in your mind and just moving around the problem. You're not exposing yourself to the full emotional weight of the feared outcome. You're managing it from a safe distance. And maybe that's necessary at the time, but we need to be careful and wary that this is avoidance. And it's not always obvious where you refuse to think about something. It's usually subtle, where you think about it endlessly in a way that prevents real emotional processing of that thing. And because it reduces your anxiety in the short term, your brain learns to rely on it. The same mechanism applies to rumination. So when you ruminate about a past mistake, you're not actually processing what happened. You're reviewing it. You're analyzing it. You're trying to understand it so thoroughly that it'll never happen again. But you're still not sitting with the emotions, the shame, the regret, or the grief, the actual emotion of it. You're keeping those feelings at arm's length by staying in your head. This is why reassurance seeking is so common among overthinkers. You ask others, hey, do you think I made the right choice here? Hey, do you think they're upset with me? Hey, do you think this will work out? And when someone reassures you, you feel better, temporarily. But the doubt returns because the reassurance didn't resolve the underlying uncertainty you already had. It just provided temporary relief from it. So you seek reassurance again and again. And each time you do, your brain learns that you cannot handle uncertainty alone, by yourself, because you keep relying on others. And so this is the truth that most people don't want to hear. It's likely that you're not tired because you decide too much and you're making too many decisions in a day and you just feel spent because of it. You're tired, maybe, because you refuse to close decisions. So every open loop in your life consumes cognitive resources. Every unresolved question sits in the background of your mind, drawing energy. And every decision that you delay creates a sense of low-grade anxiety that persists until the decision is made or until the thing has been dealt with properly. So decision fatigue, don't get me wrong, it's very real. But it's not only caused by making too many decisions. It's caused by avoiding decisions while pretending or believing yourself to be deliberate. So it's caused by keeping options open long term, maybe for your fear of missing out or just not making the right choice. And decision fatigue is also caused by mistaking your endless analysis in your mind for thoroughness. And here's how it manifests in everyday life. So we have information avoidance. So you avoid making a decision by convincing yourself that you need more information. So you research, you read reviews, and you consult experts online or in person, and you compare options. And the more information you gather, the closer you get to overwhelm. Because information does not resolve the uncertainty. It often increases it if there's no follow-through afterwards. So that's the distinction. There needs to be a follow-through. And there's decision delay. So you avoid committing to a choice by telling yourself that you'll decide later. You have time, right? It's not urgent or anything, right? So maybe when you have more clarity, when the timing's better, or when you feel more ready. But when does that moment ever come? In 10 minutes? An hour? Maybe a day? What about a week from now? A couple of months? How long? It's rarely, if ever, that you start to feel ready. Because readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. And the mere act of delaying making a decision is a decision in itself. So some cognitive load was already spent, even if it was just unconsciously. And then you have endless research. So you avoid taking action by staying in the preparation phase indefinitely. So taking courses, reading books, planning, strategizing, but you never execute, because execution requires accepting that you might fail. And failure is the outcome that you're trying to avoid by overthinking in the first place, isn't it? So let me be direct with this. So if you're stuck in overthinking, it's not that you're confused and you're not lacking information, you're not waiting for clarity, you're probably just afraid. And thus avoiding taking responsibility for an outcome that you would rather not have to experience if you didn't have to. And until you name that, the thing that you're avoiding, until you acknowledge what you're actually doing, it won't change in the way that you want it to. So we're going to shift gears now, and the last half of today will be a little bit more practical. And I'm going to ask you to do a couple activities that may feel a little bit uncomfortable. For the first one, I'm going to ask you to write, and we're going to externalize what's actually happening in your mind. Because as long as your thoughts stay internal, they remain vague, abstract, and easier to avoid. Writing forces precision. So it articulates and then transforms your anxiety. And once the threat has been articulated, it becomes a lot more manageable. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you 3 prompts, and they're on the second page of your handout. So I'll give you 3 minutes for each, and I'll time you. And if you want to stay on one for a little bit longer, then you are, of course, absolutely welcome to do so before moving on to the next. I want you to try to write continuously. So try not to edit or censor yourself. This is just for you. So don't worry about grammar or structure. Just write whatever comes to mind. And I want you to be honest. This is for yourself, for the betterment of yourself. So the more honest you can be for you, the better. So the first question is this. What decision are you avoiding right now that you know you should make? A decision that you know you should make, but you haven't. So write it down and be specific and name it. What is it? Why haven't you made it? And what are you telling yourself about why you're waiting? So I'll give you guys 3 minutes. All right, if you want to keep going, keep going. If not, the second prompt is, what are you afraid would happen if you made the wrong choice? So this is a core question, because overthinking is always driven by fear. Fear of failure, fear of regret, fear of judgment, fear of loss, fear of being exposed as inadequate. So write it down. What's the worst case scenario that you're trying to avoid? What are you actually afraid of? 3 minutes on this one too. All right, continue if you want to. If not, we'll move on to the next last question. And that's, what would happen if you did nothing for another year? We tend to underestimate the cost of inaction because it accumulates slowly. And right now, if you delayed it, you probably wouldn't see anything for quite some time. So what's the harm in delaying or avoiding it? A day of delaying it may just feel insignificant, doesn't really matter. A week still feels manageable. A month feels like you still have some semblance of control. But a year avoiding the same decision, what will that cost you? Write it down and be specific. What opportunities do you lose? What relationships deteriorate? And what version of you do you become by avoiding this? Thanks for sitting through that one, because some of those questions are, as I said, a little bit confrontational. So keep what you have in front of you. For the next activity, it's on the next page of your handbook, so it should be on the page behind, I think, yes. It's going to be a 2-person exercise, so I'm going to get you guys to pair up. And it's designed to surface what you maybe can't see on your own. Because avoidance has a way of hiding in just plain sight. So you can write about it, you can think about it, but sometimes until someone asks you the right question in the right way, you don't see it clearly. So here's how it's going to work. You guys are going to pair up, and doesn't matter if you guys don't know each other. Luckily, in this case, you guys do. And we're going to take turns. So each person is going to get 4 minutes in total. So the first 2 minutes to speak, and then 2 minutes for what comes after. So we're going to have a speaker and a listener. So the speaker, for 2 minutes, you're going to briefly describe 2 things. So you can go back and reread what you've written as well. So first, the decision that you're avoiding. Not the whole story, and not all the context, but just the decision itself. However much that you're comfortable with sharing. And second, what you're avoiding. So not what you're afraid of, but what exactly you're avoiding. So what are you not doing? What conversation are you not having, for example, or what action are you not taking? So just 2 minutes for those 2, and that's it. And the listener, your job is going to just be listening without interrupting. So I don't want you to nod too much or give sort of reassuring facial expressions. So just listen. And when the speaker finishes, you're going to repeat back briefly in just 1 sentence if you can, from your perspective, the decision the speaker expressed that they were avoiding. And then 1 simple question. And the question is, what responsibility are you trying not to take on right now? And that's it. There's going to be no follow-up. There's no talking after that. It's just that question. Because after that, the speaker's going to do 3 things. And that is just stop talking, right? So don't answer if you can. And just try not to explain or defend yourself internally or externally. Just pause. And second, both of you are going to notice what happens in your body when you both pause and say nothing. So, and speaker, this is going to be especially important for you when you're speaking. What is it that you feel? Where do you feel it in your body? Does your chest tighten? Does your stomach drop? Do you feel heat in your face? Do you want to look away? So just notice how your body feels and what emotions come up. And not the story surrounding the emotions, but the emotion itself. So try not to analyze it or interrupt it, just notice. And then speaker, you're going to make a note to yourself. There's a little spot for that underneath. So you can write it down if you need to. Notice what you did notice. What came up? This is what we call microsomatic awareness. So you're training yourself to interrupt the verbal rumination, or verbal as well in this case, and drop into your bodily experience. So this is not about getting the answer right now, although one may come. You may get an answer for what you're thinking, and which is an added bonus. But this here is about tolerating and learning to be in the discomfort of the question and your emotions without rushing to resolve it. So no advice, no reassurance, no problem solving for now, just the question, the silence together, and noticing your body. And why is doing this important? This sounds absolutely horrible, Angel. Why can't we just write? Why do we have to sit here in this awkwardness and this uncomfortableness? What are you making us do? Because dialogue and silence often surface blind spots. Have you ever noticed that you have a problem in your mind and you talk to somebody and you talk through and you're like, never mind, got the solution. That's where it comes from. And same with silence. Silence does the same thing. So the single question rule prevents rumination. So it prevents you from talking your way out of that discomfort. And having someone listen openly is going to gently challenge your avoidance by helping you realize that you are not alone and you do not have to perform and you do not have to pretend either. So clinically, this exercise disrupts any reassurance seeking. So it aligns with existential and cognitive behavioral therapy styles. So where the goal is not finding comfort, but finding clarity. So decide between you two who goes first, or if you want, I can decide for you. So speaker, you're going to have 2 minutes to describe your decision and what you're avoiding. Listener, your job is to just listen, and when the time is up, you repeat back what you heard and keep it factual and brief. So no emotion words, and try not to interpret it, and don't reassure. So for example, you could say, what I heard is that you're avoiding deciding to leave your job, and you're avoiding having a conversation with your manager. Keep it limited to 1 sentence if possible. And then ask the question, what responsibility are you trying not to take on right now? After that, both of you will stop talking and just sit with it for a moment and notice what happens in your bodies. And then write down what you noticed. After that, switch, and I'll prompt you for that as well and time you. And if you're confused about anything, please just let me know. So we're going to lift out of this sort of personal content that we just did and move into pattern recognition. Because overthinking is a very universal human problem. So when you see the patterns that maintain across different people and across different scenarios, you gain the power and the ability to distance yourself from your own loop, and inevitably from there you can interrupt it. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to, again, go into your groups, and once you're there, you're going to have one task to do together, which is across from what you've heard today and across from what you've heard from each other and from your own experience. What patterns keep overthinking going? So this is not your individual stories, it's not any personal details, but it's just patterns. So what keeps the loop alive? What maintains it? What prevents people from closing decisions and taking action? So if you can, I want you to try to identify 3 to 5. This forces you to prioritize and synthesize and identify what actually matters. And I'm going to give you some examples of patterns that people usually surface, because I want to show you what I mean by a pattern. So we have fear of regret. So being more afraid of making the wrong choice than making no choice at all. Needing certainty before taking action. So waiting for a feeling of certainty that will never come, because certainty usually only comes after action. Or mistaking thinking for progress. So a belief that as long as you're thinking about the problem, you're working on it. But remember, thinking without action is not progress, it's avoidance. So these are just examples, and if you can identify completely different patterns, that's good. The point is not to get the quote-unquote right answer. The point is to see the structure underneath, because once you see the structure, you can intervene at the structural level instead of getting lost in the details. So I want you to discuss what you've experienced today, what you've heard today, and identify 3 to 5 patterns that keep overthinking going. And write them down on the next page of your workbook. You're already on the page. Perfect. All right, perfect. Because I wanted you guys to actually think more about it, right? Think about what types of patterns, what types of things lead to overthinking. That was why I wanted you guys to do this, to get a little bit more abstract and think a little bit clearer about it, especially like what you feel typically happens for you when you get into this. So before we finish, I just want to address something that could still be bothering you. Because you might be thinking, Angel, look, this workshop, it was nice and all, but I still don't know if I feel better, right? I still feel anxious. I still don't know if I'm making the right choice. And you're right, because that's not what I designed this workshop for. While I would absolutely feel delighted to know that I helped you guys find some clarity or find some calm today, it wasn't my main goal. My main goal was to help equip you to be better at handling things in the moment out there. So, and what you might be able to do about it once you figure it out, right? So equip you with the tools that you might need. Because the truth is that your life will not become less anxious until you decide what you're willing to carry. So when you take on something meaningful, when you commit to a direction, when you make a choice that matters to you, you will feel anxiety. Because meaningful choices have consequences and they have stakes. They require you to risk failure, rejection, and regret. And your mind generates anxiety as a signal that something important is happening. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous, but just something important is happening. So the goal is not to eliminate that anxiety. The goal is to stop letting it paralyze you. So there's a concept in the literature called constructive versus unconstructive repetitive thought. There we go, got it. So constructive repetitive thought is thinking that leads to problem solving. So planning and action. And it's oriented, again, towards resolution. Now, unconstructive repetitive thought thinking that leads to rumination, worry, and avoidance. So it's oriented towards temporary relief. And the difference is not in how much you think. It's quality over quantity here. It's in whether your thinking closes loops or keeps them open. So whenever you make a decision, even an imperfect decision, you close a loop. So you free up your cognitive resources and you reduce that background anxiety that comes from these unresolved questions. And so you create space for the next thing. So when you avoid a decision, you keep the loop open. And every open loop consumes your energy. Even if those decisions require adjustment later, people who make decisions quickly often report lower anxiety than people who deliberate just endlessly. And it's because they're willing to close those loops. So the final reframe I want to leave you with is that meaning is the antidote to paralysis. So when you're stuck in overthinking, you're usually asking the wrong question. You might be asking, what's the safest choice here? What's the least painful choice? Or what's the choice that guarantees that I just won't regret it? But those questions often don't have answers because safety, comfort, and certainty are not available without follow-through. What is available is meaning, and meaning comes from choosing what you're willing to be responsible for. So not what's easy and not what's safe, but what matters. So when you orient your decisions around meaning rather than comfort, the anxiety doesn't quite completely disappear, but it becomes tolerable because you're carrying it for something that matters to you. And that makes all the difference. So the question is not how do I stop being anxious? The question is, what am I willing to feel anxious about? What's worth the discomfort? What's worth the risk for me? Because that's where your life is. Not in the absence of this anxiety, but in what you choose to do despite it. So we're going to end with a commitment and not a vague intention, but not a hopeful wish, but a concrete commitment. And I want to be clear about what I'm asking you guys to do. So I'm not asking you to solve this big decision or this big problem that you've been avoiding and make that big decision. And I'm not asking you to have everything figured out. What I want you to do is one voluntary thing this week related to your avoided decision. As I said, it doesn't have to be the actual thing, but just something related to it. So voluntary means that you're choosing it. So do not do something that you absolutely do not want to do and you will hate yourself for doing. No one is going to force you. No one is going to make you. This is your decision for you. So whatever you feel like you are happy with doing for yourself. And difficult means that it will feel uncomfortable. it will generate some anxiety. It will require you to confront something that you've been avoiding. And that means that it's concrete, it's specific, and it's measurable. So it's not I'll think about it or I'll try, it's an action. Because every time you do something difficult voluntarily, you build evidence that you can handle difficulty. You reduce that threat's magnitude on yourself. So you increase your confidence and you weaken that grip that avoidance has on your life. And so here's what I want you to do, either by yourselves or with your partner. I want you to state your commitment. So this week, I will voluntarily do one difficult thing related to my avoided decision. And I want you to say what it is. Say when you'll do it. And then do it. Not because it will feel good, because it probably won't. And not because you know that it's the right choice to make, but because it's the next step. And the next step is all you need. You don't need a whole staircase. You just need the next step that you're going to take. So find your partner again. And the reason for this is that making decisions despite the uncertainty which you guys are facing, despite that fear, is very powerful movement. And it may not feel very pleasant at the time at all, but it is still undoubtedly very powerful movement. And movement is what breaks that loop. So try to do the difficult thing this week, and when you do, just notice what happens. Notice that you survived it. There was no need for all that thinking around it, right? You still survived. And notice that you're more capable than your mind told you. And then do the next difficult thing, because that's how you build a life that's not by eliminating the anxiety, but by deciding what you're willing to carry and building that trust in yourself to follow through. So you'll find a QR code on your handout that links to a free guided breathwork audio. It'll be up on YouTube tomorrow that I created just for you guys surrounding this. So if you do feel like your mind is just wandering endlessly and you can't stop it, just take 5 minutes, you can listen to that audio as well. Hopefully that helps just soften it a little bit. And if this resonated, you're welcome to stay connected. We'll be running regular sessions like this every single month. So I hope to see you guys again to keep supporting your guys' growth. Thank you guys.